Bloodborne, Chapter 4. Ludwig, the Hunts, Father Gascoigne, and Eileen.
Oh, what's that smell? The sweet blood. It sings to me. It's enough to make a man sick.
When we as hunters first thrust into the world, we not deal with eldritch monstrosities, horrible truths, or inconceivable entities beyond the reach of space and time. None of these facets of the world are ever included, up until the end. The terrible truth of the world, mythos, was kept a secret until the end of the journey, when we first find, as in the hunt, thrust into a scared and desperate world for answers. In Yharnam, blood flows like water. You will find no bars in Yharnam, no pubs or taverns. Only blood is found in Yharnam. The pungent blood cocktail tells us, in Yharnam they produce more blood than alcohol, as the former is far more intoxicating. Blood is the source of pleasure, entertainment, worship, and emotion in Yharnam, even after Ariana, a prostitute by trade, introduces herself to the hunter, not by offering sexual services, but instead a vial of her blood. But it's not just any blood that flows through Yharnam. Only blood permitted by the known blood ministers who carried out the art was fast and first pioneered by the first vicar, Lawrence. We've already discussed how a Bretas gets her name from a species of butterfly, but she also gets her name from a Latin word meaning drunkenness or intoxication. Indeed, the blood of a Bretas not only aided to cleanse Yharnam of disease, but also provided the citizens with a drug more addictive and more intoxicating than any alcohol. But with the rampant spread of the blood came the scourge of the beasts. Once old Yharnam had been cleansed and knowledge of the scourge became public knowledge, a new way of dealing with the threat was required. Secrecy would no longer be enough, and so the workshop was retired and sealed. Instead, with the Healing Church in its new position of power, the Healing Church hunters were born. At the forefront of this new movement would be Ludwig, and the new head of the Healing Church martial force. German tells us the following. The Healing Church and the blood ministers who belonged to it were once guardians of the hunters in the times of the hunter Ludwig. According to the Sword Hunter badge, we know Ludwig was the first of many Healing Church hunters to come, many of whom were clerics. Not much is known of Ludwig's origins, but from his Radiant Hunter's badge we learn that Ludwig is part of a lineage of chivalrous warriors known as the Holy Blades. The Radiant Sword indicates the heirs to the wall and the will of Ludwig. These hunters, also known as Holy Blades, are what remains of an ancient line of heroes that date back to a very early age of honor and chivalry. Ludwig had a very different approach to hunting beasts than his predecessors in the workshop had, which we can see from the details found in the weapons of choice of Healing Church hunters. A trick weapon typically used by Healing Church hunters, it is said that the silver sword was employed by Ludwig, the first hunter of the Healing Church. When transformed, it combines with its sheath to form a greatsword. The Healing Church workshop began with Ludwig and departed from old German's techniques to provide hunters with a means to hunt for more terrifying beasts and perhaps things still worse. A rifle used by Healing Church hunters. It is said that this rifle was employed by Ludwig, the first hunter of the Healing Church. Its long, heavy barrel makes up in range for what it lacks in reload speed. Ludwig's rifle exhibits several departures from the workshop's design, suggesting that the church anticipated much larger, inhuman beasts. From these two weapons, we can see a drastic shift in design from German's workshop to Ludwig's. While the hunters of German time favored agile weapons, quick movement, and easily concealable tools, Ludwig's hunters wielded with great force. These hunters no longer hid in the shadows, they walked openly, wielding their weapons. After old Yharnam, it had become painfully clear to the Healing Church that only more and more dangerous creatures would arise from the old blood, and so more powerful weapons would be required. Ludwig sought to deal with the scourge of the beast in a very different manner than his predecessors. In the time of Lawrence and German, the healing church and the workshop operated in secrecy. The school of Mensis quietly researched, Lawrence performed blood ministration, and Gurman's hunters acted as a cleanup crew, fixers of problems. An individual would succumb and the hunters would quietly remove them in the middle of the night, leaving the population none the wiser. With Ludwig, however, a new approach was taken. Do not ignore the populace. Arm the populace. We see this from the Yharnam hunter attire. Ludwig, the first hunter of the healing church, once recruited Yharnamites to serve as hunters. This hunter's attire was made for new recruits, and has excellent straightforward defense, but not nearly enough to allow an ordinary man to stand real chance against the beasts. Ludwig would deal with the beasts not through secrecy, but through purges of hunts. Arm the population, inform them, and work alongside the citizens of Yharnam to battle the beasts. The church called for the hunts. It would, unfortunately, cause a sort of never-ending cycle. Beasts rise in order to combat the beasts the citizens rise up, imbibable in the old blood, and strike them down. Now, what have they been tainted by the old blood? They inevitably become beasts, causing more citizens to rise up, and imbibable in the old blood. Even more problematic was the fact that as the hunts called for stronger hunters would become stronger beasts. Ludwig is the first of many healing church hunters to come, many whom were clerics, and it was clerics transformed into the most hideous beasts. Hunters would become drunk on blood, addled by it, intoxicated by it. The hunters would become a threat, and so it was that we find ourselves now faced with a different group, one that seems to be particularly mysterious, the Hunters of Hunters. In central Yharnam, the hunter encounters Eileen the Crow, who warns them sternly. "Prepare yourself for the worst. There are no humans left. They're all flesh-hungry beasts now." Is the popular opposite of Jorah's warning that the beasts are still human. Eileen belongs to a mysterious organization known as the Hunters of Hunters, detailed in the Hunter rune.
This red smudged rune means hunter, and has been adopted by those who have taken the Hunter of Hunters oath. These watchmen admonish the who's become addled with blood, be the men or beasts. Anyone has threatened the pledges of the hunter has an issue with blood.
The Hunters of Hunters, it would appear, are an order as old as the workshop itself, tasked with disposing of hunters who have been lost to the intoxication of the blood. The Crow Hunter badge tells us,
"The badge of the Hunters of Hunters is quietly passed down from generation to generation, usually to an outsider from the hinterlands."
The use of the singular, an outsider, seems to imply that there is only ever one hunter of the hunters at one point in time, once a generation. It is interesting that it specifies that Hunters of Hunters are typically outsiders. Eileen herself speaks with an accent unlike a Yharnamite. Perhaps, whoever the Hunters of Hunters are, it was decided that Yharnamites, blood-drunk as they were not to be trusted with this important task. But it's the Hunters of Hunters' origin that interests us the most. Where did they come from? The crow feather attire gives us a small amount of information.
Hunters of Hunters dressed as crows to suggest sky burial. The first Hunter of Hunters came from a foreign land and gave the dead a virtuous native funeral ritual, rather than impose a blasphemous Yharnam burial service upon them, with the hope that former compatriots might return to the skies and find rest in the Hunter's dream.
The explicit mentioning of the Hunter's dream is very, very peculiar. Eileen herself appears to know about the Hunter's dream. If the hunter were attack or die to her, she will respond by instructing them to tell the little doll I said hello. Like Jorah, Eileen appears to have at one point been a dreamer, or a pale-blood hunter, like Jorah. No more dreams for me, this my last chance. It's only the link that Eileen and the Hunters have to Gurman and the Hunter's dreams, the Blades of Mercy, the weapon of the Hunters of Hunters, states.
A special trick weapon passed down among Hunters of Hunters, one of the oldest weapons of the workshop, splits into two when activated. The weapon's warped blades are forged with siderite, a rare material of the heavens.
One of the oldest weapons indeed. The Blades of Mercy are only one of two trick weapons made of siderite, a rare material that fell from the heavens. The other is Gehrman's Burial Blade, the first of the trick weapons. A masterpiece that defined the entire array of weapons crafted at the workshop. Its blade is forged with siderite, said to have fallen from the heavens. Exactly what connection Gehrman has to the Hunter of Hunters is unknown. It is possible that Hunters of Hunters were formed, police, and oversee the workshop, or it's possible that they may be a simpler and splinter faction that separated from Gehrman. Whatever their reasons, the methods are clear. Find hunters who have succumbed to bloodlust and end them. Two such hunters will be two of Eileen's targets, Henrik and Gascoigne. Father Gascoigne is the first official blood drunk we meet. While it's possible to fight the cleric beast, Gascoigne serves the first true bloodlust enemy the hunter faces, and he is the only one that serves as a very cold wake-up call to the hunter. Like many hunters, as we walked into Yharnam with a very specific mindset and caution, study the opponent, look for weaknesses, wait for their guard to be down, strike once, back off, strike twice, watch, strike, back again, back in. It's very slow, cautious, passive way the hunter reacts. But in many ways, this does not work. Gascoigne seems to be placed so early, and specifically for hunters like that, Gascoigne has the same tools that the hunter can wield. He uses a hunter axe as his weapon, and a blunderbuss as his firearm. He can be staggered, and he can stagger himself. He's a parallel to the hunter in this manner. Really, the only difference between Gascoigne and the hunter is the insanely aggressive manner in which he fights. Gascoigne charges with blind abandonment. He weaves through the fight swiftly, dodging attacks and keeping pressure on the hunter. It's almost a direct message to the hunter. You have the same tools as him. Why are you losing? He's not being unfair. He's not cheating. He's just playing the game, just like you. So why is he slaughtering you? Why do many people die, and many hunters die to Gascoigne? The hunter very quickly learns that they must adopt to Gascoigne, or they will die. Passivity is no longer a valid strategy in order to master Bloodborne. Hunter must be swift, aggressive, and unrelating like Gascoigne. But once Gascoigne reaches a certain point, he will transform. He will succumb fully to the scourge, becoming a powerful beast that will relentlessly assault the hunter. But really, understand Gascoigne. Let's start at the beginning and analyze what we can learn about him. From Gascoigne's attire, we learn that Father Gascoigne is a titled user of clerics in a foreign land, and there is no such rank in the Healing Church. This would seem to imply that Gascoigne came to Yharnam, like many others, in search of the miraculous blood ministration which was rumoured to cure any disease. The hunter was one such individual, as was Gilbert, and like many others. Like Eileen and Gilbert, Gascoigne's voice has an accent that differs slightly from Yharnamites. Seeing as Gascoigne wears attire similar to that of the Healing Church, and wields the weapons of the workshop, he was clearly trained as a Healing Church hunter after he came to Yharnam. But his attire notes that
the Ningi's scarf is a holy shawl and symbol of the Healing Church, from which Gascoigne would eventually part ways.
It's unclear exactly why Gascoigne left the church, but perhaps he left in order to raise a family. After all, Gascoigne's daughters can be spoken to in Yharnam, hiding in their house. Indeed, the daughters provide the last and the key pieces of information on Gascoigne.
Are you a hunter? Then please, will you look for my mum? Daddy never came back from the hunt, and she went to find him, but now she's gone too. I'm all alone and scared.
It would seem that when the hunt was called, Gascoigne answered. Though he had left the church, he still rose up to cleanse the streets along with the rest of Yharnam. When he didn't return, his wife Viola went off looking for him. When we find Gascoigne, he's hacking a corpse to pieces. He turns to face the hunter, having finally succumbed to the old blood.
Beasts all over the shop. You'll be one of them, sooner or later.
On a nearby balcony, a red brooch dangled from the corpse of a dead woman. But how did it come to this? What happened to Ludwig? What is the story behind Father Gascoigne, and why is Eileen in Yharnam? Everything changed after Old Yharnam. The church, seen as saviours, were now in control. No longer did they require secrecy, instead they flourished and gained power. With this power, and with the spread of the scourge, the workshop was retired and replaced with the healing church hunters, led by a hunter named Ludwig. Ludwig was a courageous, honourable, and chivalrous man who took a new approach to the hunters by recruiting openly, training the population of Yharnam to combat the dangers of the hunt, and working on designing new weapons to eliminate the beasts without issue. Ludwig was the heir to a legacy of ancient heroes known as the Holy Blades, dating back many generations. It is possible he was one of German's apprentices, who succeeded German after his retirement and was put in charge of the new, reformed workshop in the Upper Cathedral Ward. It is in this workshop that we can find the Radiant Sword Hunter Badge, which allows the hunter to purchase Ludwig's rifle and blade. But the Radiant Sword Hunter Badge also unlocks another piece of the puzzle, the Tomb Prospector attire, which is described as follows. Attire of the tomb prospectors who explore the old labyrinth on behalf of the Healing Church. The Healing Church traces its roots to Bergenworth and is therefore aware of the ruins' true importance. They contain much more than mere hunter trinkets. Indeed, they hide the very secrets of the old great ones, sought after by those with insight to imagine greatness. We can now get a bit of a better picture of Ludwig's arsenal, judging from the equipment made available by obtaining his badge. Ludwig's holy blade and rifle, his weapons of choice. Along with them, he wore tomb prospector attire, or at least he did at one point. It's possible that Ludwig travelled into the labyrinth in search of a weapon or an answer to put an end to the scourge once and for all. Maybe he simply wanted the truth, to know where the scourge came from. What he found was the holy moonlight sword.
An arcane sword discovered long ago by Ludwig. When the blue moonlight dances around the sword, it channels the abyssal cosmos. Its great blade will hurl a shadowy light wave. The holy moonlight sword is synonymous with Ludwig, the holy blade, but has never set eyes on the great blade, and whatever guidance it has to offer it seems to be very private, elusive of sorts.
It must have been fate that there had the legacy of the Holy Blades would find such a weapon. With it in hand, Ludwig truly did become the Holy Blade, a hero to the people who feared the scourge of the beast, and the leader to the church hunters who followed him into battle. But as the Moonlight Sword's description states, few people ever saw the blade. It would seem that Ludwig kept it very close to him, not allowing the others to lay eyes upon it.
You were at my side all along, my true mentor, my guiding light.
The Holy Moonlight Sword was more than just a blade. The blade offered guidance to Ludwig, as described by the guidance rune.
When Ludwig closed his eyes, he saw darkness, or perhaps nothingness, and that is where he discovered the tiny beings of light. Ludwig was certain that these playful, dancing spirits offered guidance, and emptied Ludwig of his fears, at least in the midst of a hunt.
When we hunted, Ludwig allowed the sword to guide him. He closed his eyes and followed the guidance of the Moonlight Sword as he cut down beasts. He had no fear in his heart, and became a weapon for the healing church. Without fear in our hearts, we're little different from the beasts themselves. This is something that Eileen said, but with this shift in Ludwig's personality did not go unnoticed. Ludwig's dialogue reveals that there were these accused of him being beast-possessed and degenerate. Even in the back of his mind he knew that he was doing, and what he was doing was wrong. "Good hunter, have you seen the thread of light? Just a hair, a fleeting thing yet.
I clung to it, stepped as I was in stench of blood and beasts. I never wanted to know what it really like. Really, I didn't. Yet he continued to use the holy moonlight sword and followed its guidance, hoping to secure a future where the healing church hunters became honorable warriors who protected the people. He would suffer any denigration if it meant that the goal could be achieved. In the end, became further and further, stepped away in bloodshed. With each swing of the holy moonlight sword, he descended further into beasthood. Eventually, blood-drunk as he was, Ludwig was dragged into the hunter's nightmare, cursed to wallow in a pit of corpses for all eternity. With Ludwig gone, the healing church hunters slowly began to fall apart. Organized hunts became mobs as Yanamites wandered the streets, dragged the infected out and burning them at the stake. The hunters themselves began to rely more and more on communion for strength, the healing church administering more old blood to the hunters in order to give them power to vanquish the beast. One of these hunters was Father Gascoigne. Gascoigne had come to Yharnam in search of a cure to his disease. Seeing the famous blood ministration of Yharnam as a list and a last chance of salvation, it was there that he was trained as a hunter, possibly by a man named Henrik. Very little is known of Henrik, but he wears the garb not of a healing church, but of a workshop hunter, one of German's. Henrik is also mentioned multiple times as being an old hunter. Gascoigne and Henrik would quickly become a powerful duo, partner hunters and good friends. According to Henrik's hunter garb, the tactician old hunter Henrik was once partners with Father Gascoigne, and although they were a fierce and gallant duo, the partnership led to Henrik's tragically long life. The last sentence particularly interests us, the use of the phrase of a tragically long life. It's possible that Henrik, old as he was, either grew sick or weakened in his age. Gascoigne not only wanted to see his closest friend live, but he had another reason for wanting the old hunt to continue on. He loved Henrik's daughter. Yes, okay, very much sinister, and saying he loves her as much as Mum and Dad and Grandad. Indeed, when we encounter Henrik, we find him in the Odeon tomb just as we found Gascoigne, only Henrik is not standing by the grave where Gascoigne was found. He's standing in front of the corpse of Viola, Gascoigne's wife. But Henrik is not himself any longer. He has succumbed to the old blood. Gascoigne had fallen in love with Viola, Henrik's daughter. Perhaps Gascoigne convinced Henrik in his old and weakened state to accept communion from healing church. The old workshop hunter was likely wary of the old blood, but was convinced by his son-in-law, that father of his grandchildren, to accept the administration. Gascoigne too had accepted the administration, but in his case there were complications. While the old blood of the healing church can cure any disease, it cannot repair a damaged mind. Father Gascoigne had come to Yharnam in search for a cure of his mental illness, but the blood ministration had failed. Even the tainted blood of the Great Ones could not fix bouts of insanity he had suffered. It's possible that during his episode in which he forgot the faces of his family, Gascoigne grew violent, irrational, paranoid. Viola, his beloved wife, would play him a lullaby. It would ease his mind and help him to stay grounded and sane. But Gascoigne, intoxicated as he was with the old blood, continued to hunt and continued to communion with the administration of blood. When Gascoigne failed to return from the hunt, Viola left her children, locked inside, and fled to find him, to bring him home. But she forgot the music box. When she found him, he was drenched in blood, killing man and beast alike. She pleaded with him to come home, to remember her, but he would have none of it. Viola died that night, killed by the man she loved. If the hunter has used the music box in the fight, the Gascoigne, given to her by the daughters, he suffers noticeable pain. He grasps his head, muttering and moaning. How else could he possibly react, as he then remembers the terrible things he did to his beloved? Henrik soon goes searching for Viola and Gascoigne, fearful of what may have happened to them. And when he found Viola's corpse, it was empty. His tragically long life would be ended by Aline the Crow, the hunter of hunters.
This too is hunter's work, but bears no honor. A burden you may choose to carry.
If the hunter assists Eileen in killing Henrik, then after the blood moon has risen, they will find Eileen mortally wounded in front of the grand cathedral.
I'm afraid I've made a bit of a blunder. I'm just going to have a short rest. Oh, don't worry. I've taken blood, enough to save an old woman. No more dreams for me. This is my last chance. Oh, what a fool I am. I'll have to tread carefully. That thing still lies in wait. Turn back. This is my score to settle.
Many years ago, German founded the workshop. Much like the hunter, German wields two weapons, the burial blade and the blades of mercy. Both weapons were forged as sideright by German, the first hunter. German was not alone as a hunter. He had several apprentices who he trained to carry on his legacy. Him and his apprentices practiced a special art known as quickening, as evidenced by the old hunter's bone. The bone of an old hunter, whose name is lost. It is said that he was an apprentice to old German, and a practitioner of the art of quickening, a technique particular to the first hunters. There are only 4 individuals in entire Yharnam who can use the art of quickening. If they clutch the old hunter's bone, it's German, who uses a significantly more powerful version of quickening, Maria, German's greatest pupil, and an individual known only as the Bloody Crow. The Bloody Crow is found in the Grand Cathedral as a final fight to help Irene. It is a very difficult fight. It would seem that Eileen came to Yharnam with the goal of hunting down this mark, the Bloody Crow of Cainhurst, along with the way she slew Henrik and would have slain Gascoigne if the hunter had not intervened. He knew very little of the Bloody Crow, but what we can see is that he wields a Chicago blade and has strong ties to Cainhurst, which is use of numbing mist and his dropping of a blood rapture rune. Most bizarre is that he wears the crow feather garb of the hunter of hunters. The Bloody Crow of Cainhurst, evidently one of the first hunters, as evidenced by his use of the art of quickening. Here we can paint a possible idea. In the infant days of the workshop, German trained his apprentices and gave one of them the Blades of Mercy. Mercy is a central theme to German. It appears to be his goal to grant mercy to hunters who either are trapped in the dream or have succumbed to bloodlust. This apprentice he tasked with the most job of acting as an unseen watcher of the workshop, forming a new order of people separated from communion and the old blood of Yharnam. What happened next is very unclear, and for the most part completely unexplained. Perhaps this very unclear image we can see. Perhaps this apprentice travelled to Cainhurst, or perhaps travelled to the hinterlands to train the next hunter of hunters, who would travel to Yharnam. Whatever happened, we can see the results. The Bloody Crow of Cainhurst, possibly the first hunter of hunters, or possibly the one who supervised and trained Eileen. Eileen wishes to put him to rest, to grant him mercy. But what fascinated me the most about Eileen is what happened if the hunter never continues, and never encounters her at all. If the hunter never speaks to Eileen, then if they travel to the Grand Cathedral after the blood moon has risen, they will be suddenly attacked by Eileen herself. Eileen accuses the hunter of succumbing to bloodlust. It is through this dialogue that Eileen reveals how she truly feels.
The hunter must die. The nightmare must end.
Eileen herself knows full well the way in which the hunter's dream sustains and propagates the hunters. Indeed, the hunter themselves are being manipulated by the Great Ones into carrying out their eldritch tasks. What if there were no more hunters, none left to seek blood, or carry out the will of the blood moon? Would the nightmare end? Think of the way a hunter thrills every time a boss is slain, how they rush through the dream to grow stronger, how you want only to continue hunting, to continue growing in power, in wisdom, knowledge, blood.
Few hunters can resist the intoxication of the hunt. Look at you, just the same as all the rest.
Maybe she is right.